Well, I'm back at work and getting ready to start the word come. So at first I basted, you'll see I basted a little row across here for the top of the C, but then I realized I really want to start with this stitch. So that's the location I need to determine. So the top of that stitch is going to be even with the middle of this first set of two. So I'm going to locate that spot and then leaving 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stitches unworked. The next spot, the 7th spot, will be where that stitch goes. So you can see where I stitched my basting thread initially for the top of that word. And then I realized that this is really where I want to start. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 unworked squares on Aida. It's actually 12 threads, but the space for 6 stitches. And then my next stitch is going to be right here. Let me just double check that, yes. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then number 7 goes right here. I just wanted to show you that that's another way of determining where you need to begin. I left my first basting thread in just as a way of double checking to make sure that I'm in the right place once I get ready to stitch the top of the letter. And it looks like I'm in just the right place. So I'm going to go ahead and take that basting thread out also. And now I can confidently stitch the word come. Now that I've finished the C, I need to figure out where I want to start the letter O. But I also want to just be a little extra cautious here and make sure I'm not dragging my working thread too far. So I'm going to take a moment and go ahead and slip it under these last couple of stitches. So the working thread is tucked under that stitch or under that letter. And then I'm just going to start down here at the bottom left-hand side of the letter O and work up. See, and I almost pulled that working thread to the front. Don't know if you saw that. Now I'm just going to work up and over and around and watch how my thread colors are changing. Just enough of a subtle difference to make it look like it's old and well worn and well loved. I don't have a point of reference yet, so I think I better stop and take a closer look at that letter. So on each side, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stitches, and then I'll have 2 across, and then of course 6 coming down. Let's see, how many have I done already? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's a good thing I checked and looked. And I have a little stitching mistake there. I don't do as well sewing with the English method when I'm working left to right. Let's try that again. I'm going to master doing this as a sewing method. I still did it. I think it's just really awkward. It's an awkward wrist movement to try to turn my needle at that angle. I think that's why it doesn't work for me. I think if I were working on a frame or a hoop that I did not have to hold in my hand, I would probably stitch two-handed and would be very comfortable using the English method. I have finished the word come, and I still have thread left in my needle. And so the question is, do I carry it over here to start the letter H? And this is a question that is asked very often by stitchers, whether they're novice or more experienced stitchers. In general, if you carry a thread on the diagonal, it does not show as much on the front of your fabric. You don't see a shadow of that thread quite as clearly. A lot of it also depends on the color of the thread. Now, right now, I'm in the lightest color of the pink. So if I carry that across here, I'm fairly confident it's not, whoops, that's not where I am. Oh, let's get more clear here. It's still a fairly light shade of pink where I am. So the other question becomes like, and this is what, I will just tell you, I somewhat struggle with this, and that's finding my place to start. I would like to start with this stitch right here so that I can stitch around in this direction and go up this way. So that's a stitch I want to find. So I'm going to identify that place by looking across this way. So at the bottom of this double set of stitches, not counting those stitches, coming below that, I'm going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 unworked squares to get to this spot. Let's see if I can do that on the fabric. So again, I'm going to identify these two. I'm going to come below that. I'm going to leave unworked 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 squares and make a stitch in the next square. Now I say squares, and on Aida that's pretty easy to identify. On linen, we're talking about pairs of 2 threads. So here's my stack of 2. So underneath that, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 unworked. And this is where my next stitch is going to go. With the placement of this next stitch, which is the lowest one in the letter H, I'm going to do some checking. First, I'm going to check and see if I'm lined up with the bottom of the letter E, and I am. Now I'm going to look and see where this stitch is in relationship to the H in Christmas, and it's right above this part of the H. And let's look and see if that's where it's supposed to be. So we're talking about this stitch right here, and yes, it's lined up with the H. So I spend a bit of time as I am stitching, checking and rechecking to see if I'm in the right place relative to the stitches that I have finished so far. And I think that that's one of the reasons that I don't spend a lot of time ripping out. I'm not going to say I never do, but I think that by exercising an abundance of caution as I am stitching, by checking and rechecking my stitch placement, and by not trying to identify the place to stitch over great expanses of unworked area, I think that is what saves me from a lot of ripping out. Now I'm going to stop here, and I want you to take a look on the back and see. And I see now I carried that. I thought I was carrying it on the diagonal, but that's almost straight across. I would have much rather that been more on a diagonal, which I could have done by just tucking it under a little bit of a stitch here and then bringing it down, or tucking it under a little bit of a stitch here and going over in this direction. So I'm actually quite surprised by that. I think I'm going to be okay. I don't think it's really going to show, again, because it's such a light color. If it were a darker color, I probably would stop right now and rip out what I've done and fix that. But now I'm going to go ahead and finish stitching my H. You may remember me saying that when I stitch letters, I try to stitch them as if I were writing them, especially when I'm working with a variegated. So I started here, and I went up this way, and then swooped around this way. And then, and I'm sorry I did this without showing you on camera, but then I then buried my thread under here, and I've stitched these 2 little stitches right here. So where I'm going to go next, I'm going to skip this stitch and come over here and come around like this, because I want this part of the letter to be a continuum. I don't want there to be a break in the color gradation. Now, it may end up that the way the colors are working out, that wouldn't happen anyway, but just in case, that's how I'm going to do it. So I'm going to leave this stitch right here unworked. So I'll come over and up 1 to do this work. So as you can see, I've already done the little crossbar of the H. Right here, that's the bottom of the stitch I'm going to leave unworked. That's the top of where I'm going to leave it unworked. So I'm now at the bottom of the stitch that I do want to do. So I'll do this one, and then there's another single one up and over to the right. And then looks like a stack of 2. Again, over and up to the right. You know, one thing I will say about this project that you do need to be careful about is because there are repeated letters like heart and home and come and Christmas. It's very easy to lose your place, and you think you're stitching home and you find yourself stitching heart, and you're not in the place where you should be stitching the word heart. So do be careful about that. I'm pretty sure the letters are, the H's and the C's are charted consistently, but if you follow the H with a letter E when you're supposed to be following it with a letter O, that would be a problem. Okay, so now I should be able to stitch straight down, and let's see what happens when I get to that spot. Now this is a matter of just personal preference. This is not any kind of rule that anybody has to follow, but I just find that I like to stitch letters as if I am writing them. Looks like as it ends up, there's not much of a distinction in the colors. But one never knows. I want to show you one more tip before I go on to the next element to stitch. And that is, every once in a while, if you are picking up another strand or you're unsure of how the threads are going to match, here's a tip. Like this one, I feel like, I hope this shows on the screen as much as it's showing in real life, but this is much lighter than this stitch. So what I can do is this is the end of the new strand. If I just pull it back through this way, I'm going to pull it through until I feel like that I have a match. It's getting closer. See, once I get to that part of it, I feel like that's a really good match. So that's where I'm going to, I have, you know, a tail that's way longer than it needs to be. But the point is that that tail is as long as it is because I want to make sure that my next stitch is going to match. I find sometimes that my concentration is better when I kind of break up the repetitive stitching, like the quote. So I have come home at Christmas done. All I have left to do is hearts. But before I stitch that last word, I'm going to start stitching this heart. Now the way this is designed is to, again, make it look like it's faded. And so the outside area, these S stitches, it's just one row all the way around the outside of the heart. I want to start with this stitch right here. And so it is 1, 2, 3, 4 empty spaces or unworked stitches between this part of the M and that stitch. So that's pretty easy for me to locate where that first stitch needs to be. this is the stitch on the M that I'm relating my counting to. So I need to come up 4 stitches. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, if you're stitching on Aida, then that's 4 Aida squares. On linen, it's 8 threads. So this is where that first stitch is going to be. Now before I do any more, I'm going to double check my work. So from this stitch, there's 2, 4, 6, 8 threads. So that's the right place. And now I'm going to stitch up on the diagonal. I think I better check my chart because I really didn't pay any attention to how many stitches to do on that first long diagonal. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 stitches before I start going around. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is the 7th one. And so from here, I'm going to skip a stitch. So I'm actually coming up 4 threads on this side. By the way, in case you're wondering what this basting line is for, that was a way of me checking to make sure that my 2 sides of the circle were symmetrical. I started basting at the bottom of this double stitch, or I could say at the top of the first single stitch, and came across to make sure that, again, it was at the bottom of the double stitch above the single stitch. And so that was the only purpose in putting that line in. So I can really just take that out now. Now I'm going to thread my needle with the next shade and do a row all the way around. Now I don't need to start at the bottom this time. I only did that for ease of counting from the M. So I'll most likely just start here and work all the way around. Once I got ready to stitch, I actually decided to start here because I really like just working in diagonal journeys as much as possible. used a highlighter to mark the stitches that I've completed. And so I now want you to really look at what's left and identify the long diagonals. So I'm actually going to start right here, and I'm going to stitch down this way, and then up this way, and then down here and up there. And that finishes up this heart. So keep in mind that everything doesn't have to be in rows and columns. Sometimes the best approach is to work on a diagonal. So that finishes that heart. And I actually think that that finishes our lessons. Yes, there are things that are left to be stitched, but they're not anything that you can't tackle on your own based on things that we've already done. So our next lesson, I will be washing and ironing my piece, and I'm going to talk about a couple different ways to do the finishing. So I'll see you next time.